Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going exploring management research in Latin America.
Oh, yeah, it's
It
fascinating.
really is, and we're diving into this article from the Journal of Management. It's called Conducting Management Research in Latin America. Why and what's in it for you?
Catchy title.
It is, isn't it? It basically argues that Latin America is this paradox, like so much potential, but also tons of challenges.
It's a region of contrast, you could say.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes it a gold mine for research.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got this region that's full of natural resources,
Right.
and the communication is relatively easy across borders, shared languages and less conflict than some other regions.
Makes sense.
And you've got growing democracies.
So on the surface, it sounds like a great place to do business.
You'd think so, right? But then you've also got these weak institutions, corruption volatility, and huge social and economic inequality.
So it's like this perfect storm for researchers.
Exactly. You can really put existing management theories to the test.
See if they hold up in this kind of environment.
Exactly. And maybe even come up with new ones.
And one thing that really stood out to me was just the explosion of management research coming from Latin America itself.
Oh, yeah. It's incredible.
Like research articles from Latin American scholars have jumped something like 1,400% in the last 2 decades.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And it's a few things driving that.
Like what?
Well, first, you've got Latin American universities really starting to prioritize publishing in international journals.
There's a shift in focus.
Definitely, they're like, hey, we want to be part of the global conversation.
Right.
And then you've got more management conferences and associations popping up within the region itself.
Building that network.
Exactly, fostering more collaboration.
I like it.
And then another big factor is the number of Latin American scholars getting their PhDs in North America and Europe.
Oh, that makes sense.
So they come back with those connections and that experience.
And that international perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've got this amazing setting for research and all this research activity. What are people actually studying? Like, what are the hot topics?
Well, the article highlights 9 areas that are particularly interesting.
Hit me with one.
Okay, well, how about leadership?
Huh?
Latin America has some unique leadership styles that you don't really see in other parts of the world.
Like what? Give me an example.
Like benevolent paternalism.
Benevolent paternalism.
Yeah, it's kind of like this mix of authority and care.
Okay.
So the leader is still the boss,
Right.
but they're also really invested in their employees' well-being.
Like a parent figure almost.
Yeah, kind of. It's really tied to those cultural values of respect for authority and personal relationships.
So it's not just about giving orders, it's about building loyalty.
Exactly.
Interesting. So what else is getting attention?
Well, you can't talk about Latin America without talking about family businesses.
True.
I mean, they make up a huge part of the economy, like 60% of GDP,
Wow.
and they employ something like 70% of the workforce.
That's math.
Yeah, and there are tons of research questions around family businesses, like succession planning.
Oh, yeah. That's always a tricky one.
Especially when you have that cultural emphasis on family ties.
But also the need to professionalize the business.
Exactly. It's a fascinating area.
And what about entrepreneurship? I feel like that's a big deal in Latin America.
It is. They have one of the highest rates of new business creation in the world.
Really?
Yeah, but a lot of them are what we call survival entrepreneurs,
Maybe.
meaning they're starting businesses out of necessity, not just opportunity.
Just trying to get by
Yeah, exactly, and often operating informally.
because of all the barriers to formalization.
Exactly, and that leads to some interesting research questions, like why are entrepreneurs in Latin America less successful than those in other emerging markets?
So it's not just about having a great idea, it's about navigating that whole context.
Right.
What other unique areas are researchers looking at?
Social inclusiveness and inequality is a big one.
Makes sense.
It's a chance to really examine how things like gender and ethnic discrimination play out in the business world.
Yeah, we've talked about the lack of women in leadership roles.
Exactly. And despite some progress, there's still a long way to go.
And what about this idea of vulnerable populations? Who are we talking about there?
So in the context of Latin America, we're talking about indigenous communities, people living in poverty, people facing all sorts of marginalization.
Right.
And research can look at how businesses can either contribute to those problems or help to solve them.
It's about corporate social responsibility, but maybe on a deeper level.
You're right, and maybe even looking at alternative business models, drawing from indigenous knowledge and community practices.
That's a fascinating thought.
It is, isn't it?
It is. Okay, so shifting gears a bit.
Sure.
We can't talk about Latin America without talking about natural resource industries.
Oh, absolutely. Those are huge for the region's economy.
I mean, you've got copper in Chile, soybeans in Brazil, beef in Uruguay.
Right. It's a major part of their exports.
But I'm guessing there are some challenges there too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing that's lacking is research on competition in those industries.
How so?
Well, a lot of the traditional strategic management theories might not apply in the same way.
Because.
Because when you're dealing with commodities, the products are often standardized.
So how do you gain a competitive edge?
Exactly, especially with commodity prices going up and down all the time.
So it's a whole different ballgame.
It really is.
It's amazing how the region's economic realities just shape the whole business landscape.
They really do.
It sounds like Latin America offers endless possibilities for research.
Oh, it does.
What else is on the list of hot topics?
Well, there's this whole area of research around how businesses survive in unstable environments.
Oh, yeah, like constant economic ups and downs.
Exactly, and Latin America has a lot of experience with that.
No kidding. I mean, Argentina alone has been through so many recessions.
Right, it's like a real-life stress test for businesses.
So what are they learning?
Researchers are looking at things like financial and operational flexibility.
How do you adapt when everything's constantly changing?
Exactly, it's about agility.
Being able to pivot quickly.
Right, and make those tough decisions.
Makes sense. So anything else?
Yeah, well, because Latin America is so dependent on commodity exports.
Right.
There's this big push for economic diversification.
Trying to branch out?
Exactly, and that brings us to this area of research on public industrial policies and business development.
So how government policies can either help or hinder the growth of new industries.
Exactly.
And what about public-private partnerships? I feel like we hear a lot about those in Latin America.
Yeah, they're super common, especially for things like infrastructure and social services.
Right, because the government can't do it all alone.
Exactly, and it's a really interesting area for research.
Because you have to balance the public good with private sector interests.
Right, it's this whole hybrid model that can be pretty complex.
So lots to unpack there.
Definitely.
And then there's the rise of social enterprises.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Businesses that are trying to do good and do well at the same time.
Exactly, and given the level of inequality in Latin America,
Right.
it's a really fertile ground for studying how these ventures can make a real difference.
Like a double bottom line.
Right, social impact and financial sustainability.
Love it. So we've talked about all these amazing research opportunities in Latin America.
Right, it's a really exciting region.
But I'm guessing there are some challenges too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's not all sunshine and roses.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is the lack of research-oriented careers at a lot of universities. Meaning there just aren't the same resources and incentives for research as you might find in more developed countries.
So even if you're passionate about research, it can be tough to make a career out of it.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of limited networking and collaboration.
Like being isolated from the global research community.
Right. And that's been a problem for a long time. Language barriers, limited access to international journals, fewer opportunities to connect with researchers from other countries.
So it's like working in a bubble.
Kind of. And that can really stifle innovation.
For sure.
So what else?
Well, some regulatory systems and university rankings actually prioritize quantity over quality when it comes to publications.
So it's like publish or perish, but not necessarily publish good stuff.
Right, and that can be a real problem for researchers who are trying to do high-quality work.
It's like you're being pushed to churn out articles just to meet some quota.
Exactly.
Not good. And what about this bias against non-U.S. data?
Yeah, that's a real thing.
Like some journal editors and reviewers just don't value research that's not from a U.S. context.
All right, they might see it as less rigorous or less relevant.
Which is obviously not true.
Not at all.
No.
But it can make it really hard for Latin American researchers to get their work published in top journals. So it's like this double whammy. You're facing all these challenges at home, and then you're hitting a wall when you try to share your work with the world.
Exactly. It can be really disheartening.
But the article doesn't just point out the problems, right?
No, it offers some solutions too.
Like what? Give me some hope.
Well, first of all, it's about choosing your university carefully.
Oh?
Do your research find institutions that have a strong research orientation, a tenure track system, dedicated research, funding a culture that values scholarship.
So find a place where you can actually thrive as a researcher.
Exactly. And then it's about active networking.
Getting out there and meeting people.
Right. Attending international conferences, joining professional associations, getting involved in research networks.
Building those bridges.
Exactly. And technology has made it so much easier to connect with colleagues around the world.
So don't be afraid to reach out.
Right. And then when it comes to publishing,
Yeah.
focus on quality over quantity.
Okay.
Target top-tier international journals that have rigorous review processes.
Don't settle for the easy publications.
Right, aim high and make sure your work is making a real contribution to the field.
And what about that bias against non-U.S. data?
Well, that's where framing comes in.
Meaning,
Meaning, when you're submitting to an international journal, you need to really clearly articulate why your research is relevant and generalizable.
even if the data is coming from a specific region.
Exactly. Highlight the theoretical contributions, the broader implications, the potential applications of your work.
So it's about telling the story behind the research.
Exactly. And making those connections between the local and the global.
So it sounds like doing research in Latin America requires persistence and a bit of strategy.
It does, but the potential rewards are huge.
Like what?
Like uncovering new business models that could revolutionize how we think about leadership entrepreneurship strategy,
Right.
or research that leads to greater social inclusion and economic opportunity for marginalized communities.
So it's not just about advancing knowledge for knowledge's sake.
No, it's about making a real impact on the world.
And that's what gets me excited.
Me too.
So how do we make the most of this incredible research potential in Latin America?
Collaboration is key.
Working together.
Researchers from within Latin America and those from outside the region need to come together, share their expertise, their perspectives.
Build those bridges.
Exactly. Break down those barriers and recognize that the best research often comes from diverse minds working towards a common goal.
And realizing that we have so much to learn from each other.
Absolutely.
It's almost like a call to action for researchers everywhere. Like, hey, there's this whole world of knowledge waiting to be explored.
Exactly. And it's not just about going to Latin America and extracting data.
Right. It's about
Yeah.
building those relationships
Yeah, collaborating with local researchers, respecting their expertise.
and understanding the context.
Exactly. It's about true partnership.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into management research in Latin America,
What's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this?
I think it's this. Latin America is brimming with research opportunities. Like it's a chance to challenge our assumptions about how business works,
To discover new models.
to make a real difference in the world.
It's a call to broaden our understanding of management, to embrace diversity, to push the boundaries of what we know.
And it's a reminder that collaboration is key.
We need researchers from all over the world working together to unlock the full potential of this region.
So as you continue your own research journeys, keep Latin America in mind.
Who knows? It might just hold the key to answering some of management's biggest questions.
That's what I love about research. There's always something new to discover.
Always another layer to peel back.
And that's what makes it so exciting.
Absolutely.
Well, that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And as always, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, keep diving deep.